The desert wind carried the taste of alkali dust and old bones as Gideon Hartwell rode his bay mare across the scorched Arizona territory. 3 years. 3 years since he'd last seen this unforgiving landscape that had somehow become home. The war had taken those years from him, stolen them like a thief in the night. But now he was returning to reclaim what was his land, his wives, his life. The late afternoon sun painted the red rocks in shades of rust and blood, casting long shadows from the towering saguaro cacti that stood like ancient sentinels guarding secrets he wasn't yet ready to learn. Above, a hawk circled lazily, its cry piercing the stillness of the desert air. Gideon's weathered hands gripped the reins tighter as familiar landmarks came into view. The twisted Joshua tree where he'd proposed to Nalin, the rocky outcrop where Atsa had first shown him how to find water in this merciless land. His heart quickened despite the exhaustion that seemed to have settled into his very bones. Soon, he told himself, soon he would see them again. He could almost taste Nalin's fry bread, could almost hear Atsa's low laugh as she teased him about his clumsy Apache. The memories had sustained him through the mud and blood of battlefields back east, through nights when death seemed preferable to another day of senseless killing. But as he crested the final ridge, Gideon pulled his mare to an abrupt halt. Something was wrong. Where once stood a modest homestead with its rough-hewn logs and Apache-style additions, now rose a proper ranch house with glass windows that caught the dying light. New fencing stretched across land he'd cleared with his own hands, and a painted sign proclaimed Hartwell Ranch in bold letters that seemed to mock him. "Easy, girl," he murmured to his mare, though the words were meant as much for himself. His mind struggled to make sense of what his eyes were seeing. Had Nalin and Atsa done this in his absence? But no, they would never have changed things so drastically without him. They understood, as he did, that the land was meant to be worked with, not dominated. A child's laughter rang out from near the well, high and clear like water over stones. Gideon's breath caught. A child? He urged his mare forward, dust rising beneath her hooves as they descended toward the ranch. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 summers, with the distinctive features of Apache heritage and eyes the color of desert sage. He was playing with a carved wooden horse, making it gallop through the dirt. "Papa! Papa!" the boy called out, but not to Gideon. The child ran toward the house, his small feet kicking up miniature dust storms. "A stranger's coming!" Gideon's blood turned cold despite the heat. "Papa?" The word echoed in his mind like a gunshot in a canyon. He dismounted slowly, his legs stiff from the long ride, and tied his mare to the new hitching post, another addition he didn't recognize. Then he saw her. Nalin emerged from behind the house, a basket of wet clothes balanced on her hip. She'd always moved like water, smooth and purposeful, but now she froze mid-step, the basket slipping from her hands. Shirts and breeches scattered across the red earth like fallen birds. "Gideon?" Her voice was barely a whisper, carried to him on the evening breeze. Her face, still beautiful despite the new lines around her eyes, drained of color. She looked at him as one might look at a ghost, with a mixture of longing and terror. "Nalin." He took a step forward, then another, but she raised a hand to stop him. Her eyes darted toward the house, then back to him, and in that moment he saw everything: guilt, fear, sorrow, and something else he couldn't quite name. "You're dead," she said, the words falling between them like stones. "Luther said." "The letter said you died at Antietam 2 years ago." Luther. His brother's name on her lips felt like betrayal. Gideon's jaw clenched. "Well, I ain't dead. Where's Atsa? Where's—" The front door swung open with a creak that seemed to split the air. Luther stepped out onto the porch, filling the doorway with his broad frame. He'd grown heavier in 3 years, softer around the middle, and his face bore the satisfied look of a man who'd eaten well while others starved. He wore Gideon's father's watch chain across his vest, a detail that twisted the knife already buried in Gideon's gut. "Well, well." Luther's voice dripped with false warmth as he descended the porch steps. "Look what the desert coughed up. My brother, back from the grave." "Luther." Gideon's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, where his Colt should have been, but he'd traded it for food 2 towns back. "What are you doing here?" Luther's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Living, brother. Something we all thought you'd stop doing." He gestured expansively at the ranch. "At Nalin, at the boy who now peeked out from behind his mother's skirts. Someone had to take care of things. Couldn't let your wives fend for themselves. Not Christian." The word wives dripped with contempt, and Gideon felt his hands curl into fists. "They're my wives. Luther, this is my land." "Were," Luther corrected, stroking his mustache, another new addition that made him look like a carpetbagger. "Were your wives, but a dead man can't own property, can't have wives. The law's clear on that. I've got the papers to prove it. Death certificate, transfer of deed, all legal and proper." Atsa appeared in the doorway behind Luther, and Gideon's heart clenched. She'd always been the stronger one, the fighter, but now she stood with her shoulders curved inward, her proud bearing diminished. Her dark eyes met his for a fraction of a second before sliding away, and in that brief connection he saw a warning. "If you were really their husband," Luther continued, his voice taking on a mocking edge, "then why are they here with me? Why does that boy call me Papa? Why does Atsa warm my bed at night?" The words hit Gideon like physical blows. He looked from Luther to Nalin to Atsa, searching for denial, for explanation, for anything that might make sense of this nightmare, but Nalin only gathered the fallen laundry with shaking hands, and Atsa remained silent as stone. "You son of a bitch!" Gideon growled, taking a step forward. "You knew I wasn't dead. You knew—" "I knew what the army told me," Luther interrupted smoothly. "I knew what the letter said. Captain Morrison himself wrote it, said you died brave, holding the line. Was I supposed to ignore that? Leave these women alone with nothing? They had the land. They had nothing without a white man's name protecting them," Luther snapped, his facade cracking slightly. "You think the good people of Prosperity would have let 2 Apache women hold on to prime ranching land? You think the territorial government would have recognized their claim?" He shook his head. "You always were a fool. Gideon, thinking you could play by different rules." The boy tugged at Nalin's skirts. "Mama, who is that man?" "Nobody," Luther answered before Nalin could speak. "Just a drifter who'll be moving on." He fixed Gideon with a cold stare. "Isn't that right, brother?" Gideon stood there in the gathering dusk, his whole world tilted off its axis. The ranch he'd built with his own hands had been transformed into something he didn't recognize. The women he'd married in the Apache way, not legal in the eyes of the territory, but sacred in ways Luther could never understand, now belonged to another man, his brother. "This isn't over," Gideon said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of a storm. Luther laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but it is. You're dead, remember. Dead men don't own land. Dead men don't have wives. And dead men sure as hell don't come back and cause trouble for the living." He turned to go back inside, pausing at the threshold. "There's a boarding house in town, Mrs. Garrett's. She takes in drifters. You best be heading that way before dark. Desert's dangerous at night." As Luther disappeared inside, Atsa finally moved. She stepped forward just enough to catch the last rays of sunlight, and Gideon saw what he'd missed before, the swell of her belly beneath her dress, pregnant, the final nail in the coffin of his old life. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Her hand moved to her stomach in an unconscious gesture of protection, and then she too was gone, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed across the desert. Gideon stood there as darkness crept across the land, Nalin still frozen by the wash line, the boy clinging to her skirts. The hawk had long since disappeared, and the first stars were beginning to pierce the deepening sky. "Is it true?" he asked Nalin, his voice rough. "Did you really think I was dead?" She nodded, a tear cutting a path through the dust on her cheek. "The letter Luther showed us, it had the army seal. It said—" She swallowed hard. "It said they buried you with honor. And so you took up with him, just like that." It wasn't just like that. The words burst from her like water through a dam. We mourned you, Gideon. We wore white for a month, in the Apache way. Atsa cut her hair. I burned sage every night and prayed for your spirit to find peace. But then, she gestured helplessly at the boy. Thomas was hungry. The town wanted to take the land. Luther said, he said it was the only way. Thomas, Gideon repeated. You named him Thomas. After your father? She whispered. Luther insisted. The irony wasn't lost on him. His father, who died cursing Gideon's choice to marry Apache women, now had a half-Apache grandson bearing his name. I have to go, Nayland said suddenly, gathering the last of the clothes. He'll be angry if supper's late. Nalin, please, Gideon, just go. For all our sakes, just go. She hurried toward the house, Thomas trotting beside her. At the door, she paused and looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw the woman who'd danced with him under the harvest moon, who'd taught him words in her language that sounded like water over stones. Then she was gone, and he was alone. Gideon untied his mare and mounted slowly, his body feeling every one of his 34 years. As he turned toward town, he caught a glimpse of movement at an upstairs window, Atsa watching him leave. He raised his hand in a gesture that might have been farewell or promise, but the curtain fell back into place before he could be sure she'd seen it. The desert night wrapped around him like a shroud as he rode away from everything he'd fought 3 years to return to. Behind him, smoke rose from the chimney of the house that should have been his, carrying the smell of cooking that should have welcomed him home. Ahead lay prosperity, a town that had never lived up to its name, at least not for men like him. But Gideon Hartwell was no longer the man who'd ridden off to war 3 years ago. That man had believed in justice, in love, in the power of a man's word and the strength of his hands. This man, the one riding through the darkness with nothing but a tired horse and a heart full of ghosts, this man knew better. The war had taught him that sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to lose. And as the lights of prosperity flickered in the distance like fallen stars, Gideon made a promise to himself and to the desert wind. He would take back what was his, no matter the cost. The dead might not have wives or own land, but Gideon Hartwell was very much alive, and Luther was about to learn what that meant. The old horse stable on the edge of prosperity had seen better days. Its walls leaned at angles that defied geometry, and the roof leaked in 3 places. But to Gideon, it was shelter, more than he'd had some nights during the war. Sam Morrison, who owned the adjoining blacksmith shop, had offered it for $1 a week, no questions asked. Sam had served too, though they'd never spoken of it. Some things didn't need words between men who'd seen what they'd seen. Gideon lay on a makeshift bed of hay and old horse blankets, staring up at the stars through a gap in the roof. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Atsa's swollen belly, Nalin's tears, the boy calling Luther Papa. The images burned behind his eyelids like brands. 3 years. He'd been gone 3 years, and they'd mourned him for what? A handful of months. The thought ate at him like acid. During those same years, he'd carried their memory through hell itself. At Cold Harbor, when the earth had turned to mud mixed with blood, he'd whispered Nalin's name like a prayer. At Petersburg, during the siege that seemed to go on forever, he'd survived on memories of Atsa's strength, her fierce pride that had first drawn him to her. The memory came unbidden, as clear as if it had happened yesterday instead of 6 years ago. He'd been tracking a mountain lion that had been taking cattle from the ranch. The trail led him deep into Apache territory, where most white men wouldn't dare venture alone. That's where he'd found her, Atsa, standing over the body of a white bounty hunter, his throat opened and her knife still dripping red. The man had been one of those who made their living hunting Apache scalps for the bounty. $100 for a warrior, $50 for a woman, $25 for a child. The practice turned Gideon's stomach, but the territorial government sanctioned it, called it pest control. Atsa had stood there, magnificent in her fury, expecting him to either run or try to take her in. Instead, he'd helped her bury the body. Why? She'd asked in broken English. suspicion clear in every line of her body. Because some killings need doing. He'd answered simply. That had been the beginning. She'd watched him for weeks after that, appearing and disappearing like a ghost at the edges of his property. Then one day she'd brought Nalin, her cousin, softer in manner but no less strong. The three of them had formed an unlikely bond that eventually became something more. The Apache ceremony had been performed under a full moon, with only Atsa's grandmother and a handful of her clan present, not legal in any court that mattered to white men. But Gideon had never felt more married than when they'd walked together around that sacred fire. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, bringing Gideon back to the present. He sat up, running his hands through hair that had grown too long and gone prematurely gray at the temples. Tomorrow he'd have to face the town, try to find some way to fight Luther's claim. But tonight, all he could do was remember and rage against the dying of the light. Dawn came like a reluctant witness, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock the darkness in Gideon's heart. He washed in the horse trough, the cold water shocking him fully awake, then made his way to the one place in prosperity where he might find help, or at least honest information. Judge William Cartwright's office occupied the second floor of the Territorial Bank building. The judge was old Colorado money, had come to Arizona for his health and stayed for reasons no one quite understood. More importantly, he was one of the few men in positions of power who didn't seem to care about the color of a man's skin or the blood of his wives. Gideon Hartwell, the judge said, looking up from his papers as Gideon entered. I heard you'd returned from the dead. Coffee? Judge. Gideon removed his hat, grateful for the offer. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was hot and free. I need to know where I stand, legally speaking. Cartwright leaned back in his chair, studying Gideon over wire-rimmed spectacles. That's a complicated question. Your brother filed a death certificate 2 years ago. Had a letter from a Captain Morrison, official Army SEAL and everything. Based on that, he claimed the land as next of kin. I ain't dead. I can see that. But proving it legally is another matter. You'd need documentation from the Army confirming the error. Then there's the matter of... The judge paused delicately. Your domestic arrangements. My wives. The territory of Arizona doesn't recognize polygamous marriages. Gideon, you know that, even if it did. Apache ceremonies carry no legal weight. In the eyes of the law, those women were never your wives. They were just women living on your property. The words stung, but Gideon had expected them. And now they're living on Luther's property, by their own choice, as I understand it. Cartwright's voice was not unkind, but it was firm. No one forced them. Your brother offered them protection, security, a father for the boy. The boy is mine by rights, if not by blood. Perhaps, but Luther has been raising him for 2 years. That carries weight. The judge poured himself more coffee. My advice, let it go. Start fresh somewhere else. Colorado, maybe. Or California. Place where no one knows your history. That's not advice I can take. Cartwright sighed. I figured as much. Then find yourself a lawyer. A good one. James Morrison just arrived from Boston. Young fellow with more ideals than sense. He might take your case. Morrison, like the captain who wrote my death letter? No relation. Far as I know, coincidence. The judge stood, indicating the meeting was over. Be careful, Gideon. Your brother's made friends here, powerful friends. The town's grown while you were gone, and Luther's money has helped it grow. Gideon left the office with the taste of bitter coffee and bitter truths in his mouth. The town had indeed grown. New buildings lined Main Street, including a hotel that wouldn't have looked out of place in Denver. Luther's money at work. No doubt, money that should have been going to Atsa and Nalin. He found the lawyer Morrison in a small office above the general store. James Morrison was indeed young. Couldn't have been more than 25. With the earnest face of someone who still believed justice meant something. Mr. Hartwell, Morrison said after hearing the basic facts. This is quite possibly the most interesting case I've encountered since arriving in the territory. Legally complex, morally compelling, and absolutely impossible to win. So you won't take it? On the contrary, I'll absolutely take it, but you need to understand what we're up against. Morrison pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began making notes. Your brother has established himself here. He's on the town council, contributes to the church, employs a dozen men. You, on the other hand, are a man who abandoned civilization to live with Apache women, who may or may not have died in a war that half the territory would rather forget. I didn't abandon anything. I carved that ranch out of nothing, and then left it for 3 years. To serve my country. To serve the Union. Different thing in some people's minds. Morrison's pen scratched across paper. We'll need proof you're alive. Affidavits from fellow soldiers who saw you after Antietam. We'll need to challenge the death certificate. Prove it was obtained fraudulently. And even if we do all that, there's still the matter of possession. Your brother's been improving the land, building on it. That matters in territorial law. What about my wives? Morrison looked uncomfortable. What about them? Legally, they're not your wives. They're free to live with whomever they choose, even if that choice was made under false pretenses. They thought I was dead. Proving Luther knew you were alive would certainly help our case, but proving it... Morrison shrugged. That's another matter. Gideon spent the rest of the day trying to track down men from his unit who might have mustered out in Arizona. The war had scattered them like seeds on the wind. He found one, Pete Garrett, drinking away his pension in the Silver Dollar Saloon. Gideon? Jesus Christ, that really you? Pete squinted through the whiskey haze. Heard you were dead. Yeah, everyone heard that. You remember Antietam? Remember trying to forget it? Pete signaled for another drink. You weren't there, though, were you? No, wait, you were with Sherman by then. Georgia. That's right. I was in Georgia when I supposedly died in Maryland. Hell of a trick. Pete laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your brother know you're back. He knows. And he's got your place, your women? Pete shook his head. That's cold, even for these parts. What you gonna do about it? Before Gideon could answer, the saloon doors swung open. 3 men entered, ranch hands by their look, all wearing gun belts that had seen use. They spotted Gideon immediately and spread out in a practiced movement. You Hartwell? The leader asked. He was young, maybe 20, with the kind of face that enjoyed violence. Depends which one you're looking for. The dead one. The kid's hand rested on his pistol. Mister, Luther says dead men got no business in prosperity. Says they should stay buried. Pete started to stand, but Gideon put a hand on his shoulder. Tell Luther I'm not going anywhere. Tell him yourself. He wants to see you. Now. Gideon considered his options. He was unarmed, outnumbered, and causing a scene wouldn't help his case. Lead the way. They rode out to the ranch as the sun reached its zenith. The heat was oppressive, making the air shimmer like water. As they approached, Gideon saw Atza hanging laundry, the same chore Nayland had been doing yesterday. She looked up at the sound of horses, and their eyes met across the distance. Her hand went to her belly, and she turned away. Luther was waiting on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand despite the early hour. He'd always been a drinker, but success seemed to have made it worse. Brother, Luther said expansively, come to your senses. Come to talk. Good. Talking's good. Cheaper than lawyers. Luther gestured to a chair, but Gideon remained standing. Here's my offer. $200 and a horse. You ride out. Start fresh somewhere. Maybe send a letter in a year or 2. Let folks know you're alive after all. Terrible mix-up at the War Department. Happens all the time. And my wives. My wives now. They've adjusted to the situation. Be cruel to uproot them again. Luther's smile was sharp. Besides, Atza's carrying my child. You want to break up a family? The words hit like a physical blow. Gideon's hands clenched, but he forced them to relax. That's my offer turned around to you. Luther, you leave. Tonight. Take your $200 and go. Luther laughed. You always were a dreamer. Look around you. Gideon, see those men? I pay their wages. See that house? I built half of it. See those women? They share my bed now, not yours. You've got nothing here but memories. I've got the truth. Truth. Luther stood, whiskey sloshing in his glass. The truth is, you abandoned them. The truth is, you chose war over family. The truth is, they needed a man to protect them. And I was here. His voice dropped. The truth is, they don't love you anymore, if they ever did. As if summoned, Naylin appeared in the doorway. She looked between the brothers, her face carefully neutral. Lunch is ready, she said softly. Thank you, dear. Luther's use of the endearment was deliberate, possessive. Set an extra place. My brother's joining us. I'm not hungry. Gideon said, No? Pity. Naylin makes the best fry bread in the territory. You remember her fry bread, don't you? Luther's cruelty was casual, practiced. Come now, one meal for old time's sake. Against his better judgment, Gideon followed them inside. The house was different. Furniture he didn't recognize. Curtains at the windows. A piano in the corner. Civilization. Or Luther's version of it. Thomas sat at the table, looking between the adults with worried eyes. Up close, Gideon could see Naylin in the boy's features, the shape of his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Thomas, Luther said, this is your Uncle Gideon. He's been away. In the war? The boy asked. That's right. My papa was in the war too, Thomas said proudly. He's brave. The meal was torture. Every bite stuck in Gideon's throat as he watched Luther play the patriarch. Naylin served like a dutiful wife. Atsa sit silent and stone-faced. Only Thomas seemed unaware of the tension, chattering about his pony and the lizard he'd caught. More bread, dear? Luther asked Naylin, his hand briefly touching hers as she passed the plate. She flinched slightly, and Gideon saw it. The first crack in the facade. After the meal, Luther walked him out. See? One big happy family. No room for ghosts here. Brother, this isn't over. It is, though you just don't know it yet. Luther's mask slipped for a moment, showing something darker underneath. You know what your problem always was? You thought you were better than me. Thought because you could track and shoot and charm Apache women that made you special. But where did it get you? I'm the one living your life now, and I'm living it better than you ever did. Gideon mounted his horse without responding. As he rode away, he looked back once. Atsa stood at an upstairs window, watching. She raised her hand to the glass, and he could swear he saw her mouth his name. That night, back in the stable, Gideon sat by the small fire he'd built in an old tin bucket. The lawyer Morrison had given him papers to sign, retainers and affidavits and other legal weapons that seemed weak as straw against Luther's fortifications. A shadow moved outside, and Gideon tensed. Then he heard it, a soft whistle. 3 notes repeated, an old signal. He stepped outside to find one of Atsa's cousins, a young warrior named Joseph, who'd taken a white name but kept Apache ways. She says to wait, Joseph said without preamble. She says the time is not right, but it will come. Is she well? Is he? Does he hurt them? Joseph's face was impassive. She says to wait, and to remember the place where you first met, tomorrow night, when the moon is dark. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like his ancestors had done for centuries. Gideon stood in the doorway of the stable, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow night, the place where they first met, where he'd helped her bury the scalp hunter. For the first time since returning, Gideon felt something besides rage and despair. Hope, maybe, or just the promise that this wasn't over, that maybe the dead could rise after all. He went back inside and lay down on his makeshift bed. Tomorrow he would continue the legal fight, play the game by their rules. But tomorrow night, under cover of darkness, he would meet Atsa where it all began. And maybe, just maybe, he would learn the truth behind the facade Luther had built on the bones of Gideon's life. The Apache camp lay 3 hours' ride into the desert, hidden in a canyon where white men rarely ventured. Gideon had learned the paths years ago, when Atsa first began to trust him. Now he rode them in darkness, guided by memory and starlight. The old woman sat before her wickiup as if she'd been expecting him. Maria Brokenwing, though that wasn't her Apache name, had lived through the removal attempts, the scalp hunters, the endless betrayals. Her face was a map of survival. Every line earned. "So," she said in English, her voice like wind through dry leaves. "The dead man comes seeking answers." Gideon dismounted and sat across from her, following the protocols Atsa had taught him. "Grandmother," he said, using the term of respect. "I need to understand." She laughed, a sound without humor. "Understand? You want to understand why your women share another man's blanket? Why your brother lives in your house?" She spat into the fire. "You left them. That is all the understanding you need. I went to war. I had no choice. There is always choice. You chose honor over love, duty to strangers over duty to family." Her eyes glittered in the firelight. "And now you return, expecting them to wait like shadows? Like they have no life beyond you. I expected them to mourn me longer than a few months," Gideon said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "They mourned. I watched Atsa cut her hair to the scalp. I heard Nalins wailing songs that went on for 3 days and nights. They mourned until morning threatened to kill them too." The old woman pulled her blanket tighter. "Then your brother came with his paper that said you were dead, with his promises of protection. And they believed him so easily?" "Easily?" Maria's voice turned sharp. "You think it was easy? The town wanted to drive them off. Men came at night, making threats. The territorial marshal said Apache women had no legal claim without a white husband. Your brother was the only thing standing between them and removal, or worse." Gideon stared into the fire, processing this. He'd been so focused on the betrayal, he hadn't considered the practicalities. 2 Apache women trying to hold prime ranch land in a territory that barely considered them human. Of course, they'd been vulnerable. "Tell me about Luther," he said. "How did it happen?" Maria was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then, he came first as a helper. Said you would want him to look after things. He was careful, respectful, at first. He learned some words in our language. He protected them from the worst of the town's hatred, and slowly, like a river changing course, he became necessary. And when he decided to take them as wives, it was not like that. When the marshal came with eviction papers, Luther said the only way was marriage, legal marriage. In the white way, he said it was temporary, for protection only. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent." She looked at him directly. "He is not cruel to them, if that is what you fear, but he is not you. He sees them as possessions, prizes won. You saw them as equals. Does he force them? What is force? He provides food, shelter, protection. In return, they provide what wives provide. Is that force, or is it survival?" She shrugged. "Ask the sparrow if it chooses to fly south in winter." Gideon couldn't sit still any longer. He stood and paced, his boots stirring dust that sparkled in the firelight. "Joseph said Atsa had a message, said to meet where we first met." "Did he?" Maria smiled slightly. "Joseph talks too much, but yes, she will be there tomorrow night, though what you hope to gain—" She trailed off. "I hope to gain my life back. Your life is gone. That man who left 3 years ago, he is dead, as surely as if the bullets had found him. The question now is what kind of man will rise from his ashes?" She studied him with eyes that had seen too much. "Be careful, Gideon Hartwell. The path of revenge leads only to more graves. I don't want revenge, I want justice. In these lands, they are often the same thing." Gideon rode back to town as dawn approached, Maria's words echoing in his mind. He found Morrison already at his office, surrounded by law books and empty coffee cups. "Good news and bad news," the lawyer said without preamble. "I found a witness who'll swear he saw you alive after Antietam, a supply sergeant who mustered out in Tucson. That's the good news. And the bad. Luther's been busy. He's filed additional paperwork claiming you abandoned the property before the war. Says you were gone for months at a time. Left the women to fend for themselves. He's got witnesses who'll testify to that. I was working hauling freight to California to earn money for improvements. Can you prove that? Receipts? Contracts? Gideon shook his head. Most of his dealings had been handshake agreements, paid in cash. What about the Army? Can't they confirm the death notice was wrong? I've sent inquiries, but the war scrambled everyone's records. Could take months to get a response, if we get one at all. Morrison rubbed his eyes. There's something else. Luther's been spreading money around town. The judge warned you about his connections. But it's worse than that. He's got the mayor, half the town council, even the newspaper editor in his pocket. So we can't win. Not in court. Not easily. Morrison leaned back. But there might be another way. Public opinion. If we could turn the town's sympathy toward you, the returning war hero cheated by his brother, that might pressure Luther to negotiate. The town that wanted to run off my Apache wives. That public opinion? Morrison had the grace to look embarrassed. Point taken. But times are changing. Slowly, but changing. And everyone loves a good story of injustice overcome. They spent the morning preparing affidavits and counterarguments. But Gideon's mind was on the coming night. When the sun reached its zenith, he excused himself and headed to the stable. He needed rest if he was going to ride out again after dark. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself thinking about that first meeting with Atsa. The moment that had changed everything. She'd been so fierce, standing over that scalp hunter's body, ready to fight the whole world if necessary. And he'd surprised her by being different from what she expected. Why? She'd asked after they buried the man. Because some killings need doing. He'd said later, much later. She'd told him that was when she first thought he might be worth knowing. Not because he'd helped her, but because he understood that sometimes justice wore a different face than the law. As darkness fell, Gideon saddled his mare and rode out. He took a circuitous route, doubling back twice to make sure he wasn't followed. Luther might have men watching him. The place where they'd first met was a small box canyon, unremarkable except for the spring that bubbled up from the rocks. The scalp hunter's grave was still there, marked by a pile of stones. Gideon dismounted and waited. She came like a ghost, on foot, moving with the silence her people had perfected over generations. Even pregnant, she moved with grace. She stood at the edge of the firelight he'd built, studying him. "You look older," she said finally. "You look beautiful." "Don't," her voice was sharp. "Don't talk to me like nothing has changed." "Everything has changed." "Not everything. I still love you." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Love? What does love matter when you're dead? When men come in the night threatening to burn the house? When the marshal says he'll have us removed to San Carlos?" She stepped into the light, and he could see her face clearly, thinner than he remembered, with new lines around her eyes. "Love didn't protect us. Luther did. By lying, by stealing what was mine. Was it stealing, or was it salvaging what you abandoned?" She placed a hand on her swollen belly. "This child will have a name, a legal name. It will never be called half-breed bastard, never be denied schooling or property rights. Can your love promise that?" The words cut deep because they held truth. "So you're happy with him?" "Happy?" She looked at him as if he were a child. "I am surviving. We are surviving. Nullen's boy goes to the white school. I have papers that say I am Mrs. Luther Hartwell, legal wife, not Apache woman. These things matter more than happiness." "And sharing his bed? Does that matter too?" For the first time, her composure cracked. "You think I wanted this? You think when he touches me, I don't think of you, but you were dead. Gideon, dead." Tears ran down her face. "We burned sage for you. We cut our hair. We sang the death songs. And then we had to live." Gideon stepped toward her, but she backed away. "Why did you want to see me?" "To warn you, Luther is not the fool you think. He has plans. He's already sent to San Francisco for a judge who will rule in his favor. He has men who will swear they saw you desert before the war. He will destroy you in court. Then I'll fight him another way." "How?" "With guns. You'll be shot down like a dog, and he'll be the grieving brother who had no choice." She wiped her tears angrily. "Go away, Gideon. Go far away and start a new life. Forget us. I can't." "Then you're a fool." She turned to leave, then stopped. "There's something else. The child. It might be yours." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "The timing. It's uncertain. Luther believes it's his, and I let him believe." She looked at him over her shoulder. "But if it's born with your eyes, your jaw, what then? Do you think he'll let it live? Do you think he'll let me live? All the more reason to fight, all the more reason to go." She spun to face him. "Don't you understand? Your presence puts us in danger. Every day you stay, Luther grows more suspicious, more violent. He drinks more. He watches us more closely. Last week he struck Nayland for mentioning your name. He hit her. Once, Joseph wanted to kill him for it, but I stopped him. One dead white man. They might overlook 2, and they'll come for the whole tribe." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the sage in her hair. "Please, Gideon, if you ever loved us, go." "And if I can't?" She studied his face for a long moment. "Then you'll destroy us all." She reached into her dress and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "Here, I saved this." It was his mother's wedding ring, the one he'd given her during their ceremony. The gold caught the firelight, warm and familiar. "I can't wear it," she said, "but I couldn't throw it away either. Take it. Remember us as we were, not as we are. Atza." But she was already moving away, disappearing into the darkness as silently as she'd come. Gideon stood alone by the fire, the ring heavy in his hand. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness in the world. He stayed there until the fire died to embers, then mounted his horse for the long ride back. As he rode, he thought about her words, about the danger his presence brought. But he also thought about the child she carried. Who might be his? About Nayland being struck for speaking his name. About the grave of the scalp hunter, and his own words. Some killings need doing. By the time he reached town, the sun was rising. Morrison was waiting at the stable. Face grim. "Luther's made his move," the lawyer said. "He's filed charges against you for trespassing, harassment, and making threats. There's a warrant. Sheriff's looking for you." Gideon dismounted slowly. "So it's war, then. It's the law. You need to turn yourself in. Fight this properly." "The law?" Gideon laughed bitterly. "The same law that says my wives aren't my wives? The same law that lets him steal everything with a piece of paper? It's the only law we have." "No," Gideon said, thinking of Atza's fierce eyes that first day, of justice that wore a different face. "It's not." He handed Morrison the reins. "Take care of my horse. I'll be back." "Gideon, don't do anything." But Gideon was already walking away, his mother's ring clenched in his fist. The time for playing by their rules was over. If Luther wanted war, he'd get it, but it would be fought on Gideon's terms now. The desert had taught him patience. The Apache had taught him cunning. And the war had taught him that sometimes the only way to win was to change the game entirely. As he walked through the awakening town, past the sheriff's office where men were gathering, past the church where Luther played the respectable citizen, Gideon smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. The dead man was done staying buried. James Morrison proved more resourceful than his youth suggested. While the sheriff's men searched for Gideon in town, the young lawyer had arranged for him to hide at the old Butterfield stage station, abandoned since the railroad came through. It sat 15 miles from Prosperity, forgotten by everyone except owls and rattlesnakes. "I've been digging into Luther's papers," Morrison said, spreading documents across a dusty table. "Your brother's been clever, but not perfect. Look here, the date on the transfer deed. It's 3 days before the army letter supposedly arrived." Gideon studied the document. Such a small thing, 3 days. But in law, timing mattered. Can we prove when the letter actually came? The postmaster keeps records. Old Sam Hutchins is honest as daylight. If we can get him to testify. Morrison trailed off. Both men knew the weight of Luther's influence. What else? Your Apache wives, forgive me, your women. They signed documents, but signatures can be forged, especially when the signers can't read English well. Morrison pulled out another paper. I found something interesting in the courthouse records. 2 weeks after Luther filed the death claim, he withdrew $1,000 from the bank, cash, no listed purpose. Bribes, or payments for services rendered, maybe to whoever forged that army letter. Morrison's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. If we could trace that money. A horse approached outside. Gideon's hand went to the colt he'd acquired, traded his mother's ring to Pete Garrett for it, though the decision had torn at him. But it was only Joseph, dismounting with the fluid grace of his people. There's trouble, Joseph said without preamble. Luther knows Atsa met with you. He's locked her in the house, won't let her or Nylon leave. Gideon half rose, but Morrison grabbed his arm. That's what he wants. You show up there, he can shoot you as a trespasser. It's legal. Legal be damned. Listen to your lawyer, Joseph said. There's more. Some of the people, our people, they're angry. They talk of night visits, of teaching Luther fear. I've held them back, but... He shrugged eloquently. No. Gideon's voice was firm. No Apache attacks. That's all Luther would need to call in the army. Claim Indian uprising. Your people would suffer most. Then what? Joseph's frustration was clear. We watch while he holds them prisoner, while he beats them. Has he hurt them? Not yet, but he drinks. And when white men drink. Joseph didn't need to finish. They all knew how that story usually ended. Gideon paced the small room, thinking. Luther was trying to force his hand, make him act rashly, but two could play at provocation. Morrison. What would happen if we published our side in the newspaper? The editor's in Luther's pocket. Not the Prosperity Gazette, the Tucson paper. They love scandal, especially about territorial officials. And Luther's on the town council now. Isn't he? Morrison's face lit up. A public accusation of fraud, theft, false imprisonment. It would force an investigation. Can you write it? I'll ride to Tucson tonight. But Gideon, this will escalate things. Luther won't take public embarrassment well. Good. Angry men make mistakes. Gideon turned to Joseph. I need you to get word to Atsa and Nolan. Tell them to hold on, to be ready. When Luther makes his mistake, we need to move fast. The next days passed intense preparation. Morrison's article appeared in the Tucson Weekly Star with the headline, Brother Against Brother, a tale of theft and deception in prosperity. It laid out the case in damning detail, the suspicious timing of documents, the $1,000 withdrawal, the imprisonment of two women whose only crime was believing their husband dead. The response came swiftly. Luther arrived at the stage station with 6 men, all armed. Gideon watched from the rocks above as they searched the building, Luther's voice carrying clearly in the desert air. I know you're out there, brother. Come face me like a man. When they found nothing, Luther's frustration boiled over. He shot out the windows, kicked in doors already hanging loose. You think you can hide behind newspapers and lawyers? You think you can make me look the fool? One of his men, Gideon recognized him as Wade Beckett, a gun hand with a reputation, said something too low to hear. Luther wheeled on him. I don't pay you for opinions, Beckett. I pay you to follow orders. They left eventually, but not before Luther shouted one last message to the empty desert. You've got 1 week. Gideon, show yourself, or I'll assume those Apache women are widows for real this time. After they were gone, Gideon climbed down from his hiding spot. The threat was clear. Surrender, or Luther would kill Atsa and Nolan, claiming they'd tried to escape or some other lie. A week. Not much time. That night, unexpected help arrived. Sam Hutchins, the postmaster, rode out with a package of letters. The old man looked nervous but determined. Been thinking on things, Sam said. What's right and what's legal ain't always the same. These here are the postal records from 2 years back. The army letter about your death? It arrived on the 15th, not the 12th like Luther claimed. You'll testify to that? Sam shifted uncomfortably. Rather not end up in court, if it's all the same. But the records speak for themselves. It was something, but not enough. Gideon needed more leverage. Something that would force Luther's hand without endangering Atsa and Nayland. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 nights later, one of Luther's own men appeared at the hidden camp Gideon had made in the hills. Not Beckett, he was too loyal, but a younger hand named Charlie Moss. "I didn't sign on for hurting women," Charlie said without preamble. "Luther's getting worse. The drink, the paranoia. Last night he put a gun to the Apache woman's head, the pregnant one. Said he'd kill her if she'd been unfaithful. What stopped him? The other one, Nayland. She said the baby was his, swore on her boy's life. He believed her, or pretended to." Charlie looked sick. "I've done things I ain't proud of, Mr. Hartwell, but I won't be part of killing women. What do you want?" "Out. Safe passage somewhere Luther can't find me. In exchange." Charlie pulled out a folded paper. "This is the real Army letter. Luther had me steal it from the post office 2 years back, before Sam logged it in. The one he showed around was forged." Gideon took the letter with trembling hands. His own death notice, official seal and all. But the details were wrong, the unit number, the battle location, even his middle name. Whoever wrote it had only basic information. Who forged the fake one? Luther did it himself. Man's got a talent for copying writing. Charlie glanced around nervously. "There's more. That $1,000 he took out, 500 went to Captain Morrison, the real one, to write this letter. The captain was drunk, desperate, sold his honor for gambling debts. Where's Morrison now? Dead. Killed in a saloon fight in El Paso 6 months back. Convenient, huh? Very convenient." Luther had been thorough, but not thorough enough. This evidence, combined with the postal records, would destroy his legal claim. But first, Gideon had to keep everyone alive for 4 more days. "Tell me about the house." Gideon said, "Guards, routines, everything." Charlie talked for an hour, sketching rough maps in the dirt. Luther kept 2 men on watch at all times. He'd barred the windows, locked the doors. Atsa and Nayland were allowed in the kitchen and their bedrooms. Nowhere else. The boy, Thomas, had been sent to town to stay with the schoolmaster. Luther didn't want the child witnessing what might come. "He's planning something," Charlie concluded. "All this week, he's been moving things around, sending men on errands. Beckett's been riding to Tucson regular-like." After Charlie left with promises of safe passage to California, Gideon sat in the darkness, planning. Luther's deadline was a trap: surrender and die. Or wait and let Atsa and Nayland die. But every trap had a spring. And if you knew where it was... The next morning brought Morrison with urgent news. "Luther's filed new papers. He's claiming you deserted before the war, that you abandoned the property. He's got 3 witnesses who'll swear they saw you leave with no intention of returning. Let me guess. Beckett and 2 other guns." "How did you know?" "Because Luther's running scared. He's trying to build walls of paper and lies. But he knows they won't hold." Gideon showed Morrison the real Army letter. "This changes everything." Morrison studied it with growing excitement. "My God, this is it. With this and Sam's records, we can prove fraud. Luther could face prison time. First, we need to get Atsa and Nayland safe. The sheriff won't help. He's been bought. Then we do it ourselves." Gideon stood, checking his Colt. "Tonight, while Luther's focused on his deadline game." Morrison paled. "That's not legal advice I can give. I'm not asking for legal advice. I'm asking if you'll help save 2 women from a man who's drinking himself toward murder." The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you need me to do?" They spent the day preparing. Joseph gathered 5 Apache warriors, men who'd been itching for action. Morrison rode to town to file legal papers that would draw Luther's attention. And Gideon cleaned his weapons and prayed to whatever god watched over fools and desperate men. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold, Gideon prepared for what might be his last ride. He thought of Atsa, fierce and proud, carrying a child that might be his. He thought of Nayland, gentle but strong, who'd raised her son in the shadow of his supposed death. He thought of Luther, his brother, who'd let greed and opportunity poison whatever love had once existed between them. Tomorrow was Luther's deadline. But tonight Gideon would spring the trap from an unexpected direction. Tonight, the dead man would rise one more time. He mounted his horse as darkness fell, Joseph and his warriors materializing from the shadows like ghosts of vengeance. Behind them, Morrison sat in his buggy, papers that could destroy Luther legally tucked in his coat. "Ready?" Gideon asked. Joseph smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "My people have a saying, the eagle is patient, but when it strikes, its talons are sharp. Then let's strike." They rode toward the ranch under a moonless sky. 7 men against Luther's small army. The odds were bad, the plan dangerous, and failure meant death for all of them. But Gideon had already been dead once, and as Atzah had shown him that first day. Sometimes resurrection required blood. The ranch lights glowed in the distance, and somewhere behind those barred windows, 2 women waited for salvation or death. Gideon touched the empty place where his mother's ring had rested, said a silent prayer, and spurred his horse forward into the darkness. The night swallowed sound like a hungry beast. Gideon and Joseph's warriors moved through the darkness with practiced silence, spreading out to surround the ranch. Morrison had done his part. Luther and 3 of his men had ridden to town to answer an urgent legal summons that would prove to be a masterful forgery. That left 3 guards, by Charlie's count, better odds, but still dangerous. Gideon crept toward the house, memories flooding back with each familiar stone and shadow. Here was the corner where he'd carved his initials next to Nolan's Apache symbols. There was the rain barrel where Atzah had laughed at his clumsy attempts to haul water. Every inch of this place held ghosts of better times. A guard lounged on the front porch, rifle across his knees. Another would be at the back, Charlie had said, with the 3rd patrolling. Gideon waited, patient as the desert itself, until the patroller passed. Then Joseph's men struck. They took the guard swiftly, silently, Apache warriors who'd learned their craft through generations of necessity. No killing. Gideon had insisted. Unconscious men told no tales and gave Luther no martyrs. Within minutes, 3 bound and gagged guards lay hidden in the barn. Gideon approached the front door, his mother's ring now back in his possession after Pete had sobered up and insisted on returning it. "Payment enough that you came back alive," Pete had said. The door was locked, as expected, but Gideon knew this house, had built half of it with his own hands. The kitchen window had never latched properly, a fact Luther apparently hadn't discovered. He eased through the window, dropping silently to the floor. The house smelled different now. Luther's tobacco, expensive whiskey, the cloying perfume that must have come from Tucson or beyond, foreign scents in what had been his home. Voices drifted from upstairs, Nayland singing softly, the Apache lullaby she'd hummed while pregnant with Thomas. Gideon's throat tightened. He moved toward the stairs, then froze as footsteps approached from the parlor. Beckett emerged, gun already drawn. He'd stayed behind, the one detail Charlie hadn't known. For a heartbeat. They stared at each other in the dim light. "Should have stayed dead. Hartwell," Beckett said, raising his weapon. Gideon moved faster. Driven by desperation and rage, they crashed together, wrestling for the gun. Beckett was younger, stronger, but Gideon fought with the fury of a man with everything to lose. The gun went off, the sound enormous in the closed space, plaster raining from the ceiling. Footsteps pounded overhead. Nayland's scream cut through the air. Gideon drove his knee into Beckett's stomach, grabbed the gun hand, twisted, bones cracked. Beckett howled and dropped the weapon. Gideon's fist connected with his jaw, dropping him to the floor. "Gideon," Atzah's voice from the top of the stairs, disbelieving. "Get whatever you need," he called up. "We're leaving now." She appeared at the landing, Nayland behind her, even in the chaos, even heavy with child. Atzah moved like a warrior. "The windows are barred. Luther has the keys. Then we go the way we came." Gideon grabbed Beckett's gun. Checked the cylinder. "Joseph's outside with—" The front door exploded inward. Luther stood framed in the doorway, dust on his clothes from the hard ride back, face twisted with rage. Behind him, 2 of his men spread out, guns drawn. "Dead men should stay buried," Luther snarled. He'd been drinking. Gideon could smell it from 10 feet away. "You always were too stubborn to know when you were beaten." "Let them go. Luther, this is between us." "Nothing's between us. You're nothing. A ghost. A memory." Luther's eyes flicked to Atsa. "Get back upstairs. Woman, now." Atsa didn't move. "No." The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Luther's face darkened. "You forget yourself. You're my wife. You'll do as I say." "I was never your wife." Atsa's voice carried the pride of generations. "Papers don't make a marriage. Lies don't make a family." "Shut your mouth, you Apache." "Luther." Gideon stepped forward, keeping himself between his brother and the women. "You've lost. We have the real army letter. We have witnesses. Your whole scheme is falling apart." Luther laughed. An ugly sound. "You think I care about papers now? You think I'll let you take what's mine? They were never yours. They've been mine for 2 years. I fed them, clothed them, protected them from this town that would have thrown them to the wolves. I gave that boy a name, a future. And this is the thanks I get." His gun hand trembled with rage or drink or both. "You abandoned them. You chose glory over family. And now you want to waltz back in." "I chose duty. There's a difference." "Duty." Luther spat the word. "You always thought you were better than me, the noble son, the one father was proud of. But where did it get you? I'm the one who survived. I'm the one who prospered. By stealing, by lying, by being smart, by taking opportunities." Luther's voice rose to near hysteria. "You think the world cares about honor? About doing right? The world crushes men like you and rewards men like me." Movement in the doorway behind Luther. Joseph and his warriors, silent as shadows. Gideon kept his eyes on his brother, not wanting to give them away. "Maybe you're right," Gideon said slowly. "Maybe the world does reward men like you. But sometimes—" He thought of that first day with Atsa, of justice that wore a different face. "Sometimes the world needs correcting." Luther must have seen something in his eyes. He started to turn, but Joseph was already there, knife at his throat. The other warriors disarmed Luther's men before they could react. "No killing," Gideon said quickly. "We're not murderers. Speak for yourself." Joseph growled, but he held the blade steady without pressing. "Gideon." Naylin had found her voice. She descended the stairs slowly, as if in a dream. "You're real. You're alive. I'm alive." The words came out rough. "I'm sorry. Naylin, sorry I left. Sorry I couldn't protect you." She crossed to him, raised a trembling hand to his face. "We thought, the letter, Luther showed us." "I know, it's not your fault." "Touching." Luther's voice dripped venom despite the knife at his throat. "But you're forgetting something. Brother, that child she carries, it's mine, legal heir to everything. You can't change that." Atsa moved then, descending the stairs with deadly grace despite her condition. She stopped directly in front of Luther, studying him with those dark eyes that had seen too much. "You want to know whose child this is?" she asked softly. "You really want to know?" Luther's eyes darted between her and Gideon. "You're my wife. It's mine. I was never your wife. I endured you. There's a difference." She placed a hand on her belly. "This child was conceived before Gideon left. I've counted the days, the moons. I know. You're lying." But doubt crept into Luther's voice. "Am I? Look at Gideon. Look at me. Then think about timing." Her smile was sharp as Joseph's blade. "You were so eager to claim us. You never asked the right questions." Whether it was true or not, and Gideon suspected Atsa was weaving truth and lies into a weapon. The effect on Luther was devastating. His face went white, then red. "You whore," he whispered. "You let me think." Gideon's fist cut off whatever else he might have said. Luther crumpled, blood streaming from his nose. Joseph stepped back, letting him fall. "Tie them up," Gideon ordered. "We'll leave them for the sheriff to find, along with Morrison's papers." "In the sheriff's bot," Joseph pointed out. "Not anymore." Morrison appeared in the doorway, disheveled but triumphant. "Had a very interesting conversation with Judge Cartwright. Turns out the territorial governor's been looking for an excuse to clean up Prosperity. Fraud, bribery, false imprisonment. Luther gave him everything he needed." "You set me up." Luther struggled against the ropes Joseph's men were wrapping around him. "You all set me up." "No," Gideon said quietly. "You set yourself up the day you decided to steal what wasn't yours. We just helped you fall." They left Luther and his men tied in the parlor, guarded by 2 of Joseph's warriors until the authorities arrived. Gideon helped Atza and Nayland gather their few real possessions. Not the fancy dresses Luther had bought, but the Apache items they'd hidden, the small treasures that mattered. In what had been his bedroom, their bedroom, Nayland pulled out a bundle from beneath a floorboard. "I saved these," she said, unwrapping Gideon's letters from the war, worn soft from reading. "Every night, I read them, even after we thought you were gone." "Why didn't you go to your people?" Gideon asked. "After you heard I was dead." "Thomas," she said simply, "half-white boys aren't always welcome. And Luther said, if we stayed, Thomas could inherit. Could be somebody." Tears ran down her face. "I'm sorry. Gideon, I thought I was protecting my son." "Our son," Gideon corrected gently. "I helped raise him his first 2 years. That makes him mine in every way that matters. He won't remember you. Then we'll make new memories." Outside, dawn was breaking across the desert, painting the world in soft pastels that seemed to promise new beginnings. Atza stood by the well, one hand on her belly, watching the sun rise. "What now?" she asked as Gideon joined her. "Your brother will fight this. Even from prison, he'll have lawyers, appeals. Let him. We have truth on our side now." "Truth?" She laughed, but it wasn't bitter. "Since when has truth mattered in white men's courts?" "Since we made it matter." He touched her shoulder carefully, still not sure where they stood. "Atza, what you said in there, about the child, does it matter?" She turned to face him. "Whether this child is yours by blood or just by choice?" "No," he said after a moment. "No, it doesn't." "Good answer." For the first time since his return, she smiled, just slightly, but real. "We have much to rebuild. Gideon Hartwell, not just the ranch. Trust, love, family, these things don't come back just because the dead rise. I know, but I'm willing to work for it." "Work?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, there will be work, and talking, and probably yelling. I have 2 years of anger stored up. I can take it. We'll see." She started back toward the house, then paused. "The baby kicks at night. Would you like to feel?" Gideon's throat tightened. "Yes." She took his hand, placed it on her belly. They stood there in the morning light, waiting. Then movement. Life asserting itself despite everything that had tried to destroy it. "Strong," he said. "Like its parents. All of them." Morrison's wagon arrived to take them to town, where they'd stay until the legal dust settled. As they prepared to leave, Gideon took one last look at the ranch. It would need work. Luther's improvements would have to go. The land allowed to breathe again. But it was theirs. "You coming?" Nayland called from the wagon. Thomas's belongings clutched in her arms. "Coming," he called back, as the wagon rolled away, Luther's curses following them on the wind. Gideon allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The war had taught him about victory and defeat, but coming home had taught him something more important. Sometimes the greatest battle was just surviving long enough to fight for what mattered. And now, finally, he had that chance. The week that followed tested them all in different ways. They stayed at Morrison's boarding house on the respectable side of Prosperity. 3 rooms that felt both too close and too far apart. Gideon found himself walking the halls at night, caught between the urge to knock on doors and the knowledge that time and trust couldn't be rushed. Thomas arrived on the third day, brought by the schoolmaster who'd been keeping him. The boy stood in the doorway, clutching a small wooden horse, the same one Gideon had seen him playing with that first day. "Mama?" Thomas looked between Nayland and Gideon with confused eyes. "Where's Papa?" "He had to go away," Nayland said carefully. This is Gideon. He's family." "Uncle Gideon." The boy remembered Luther's introduction. "Papa said you were dead." "Sometimes people make mistakes," Gideon said, crouching to the boy's level. "Even Papa's." Thomas studied him with that direct gaze children possessed. "Are you going to be my new Papa? Would that be all right with you?" The boy considered this seriously. "Can you ride? Papa couldn't ride very good." "I can ride." "Can you catch lizards?" "I'm fairly good at lizard catching." "Okay." Thomas moved past him to his mother. Decision made with the simple logic of childhood, but rebuilding that relationship would take time. Gideon knew. 2 years was a lifetime to a 4-year-old. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed. Judge Cartwright, freed from Luther's influence by the territorial governor's intervention, reviewed the evidence with meticulous care: the forged death certificate, the fraudulent land transfer, the witness testimonies. It painted a damning picture. Luther fought back with expensive lawyers from San Francisco, claiming he'd acted in good faith, that he'd only tried to protect 2 vulnerable women. But Charlie Moss's testimony, delivered via sworn affidavit from California, destroyed that defense. The real Army letter, with its obvious errors, was the final nail. On the morning of the hearing, Gideon dressed in his best clothes, borrowed from Morrison, since his own were trail-worn beyond redemption. In the mirror, he saw a stranger, thinner than before the war, marked by sun and hardship, but alive, undeniably alive. "You clean up decent," Atsa said from the doorway. She wore a simple dress, refusing the elaborate costumes Luther had bought. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, the child riding low. "Any day," the doctor said. "So do you." "Liar. I look like a woman about to burst." But she said it with humor, a thawing of the ice between them. "Are you ready for this?" "For court, yes. For what comes after?" He turned from the mirror. "I don't know." "Honest, good." She moved into the room, studying him. The Gideon who left wouldn't have admitted uncertainty. That Gideon hadn't seen what I've seen. No, he hadn't. She was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something. About Luther, about those years." Gideon's stomach clenched, but he nodded. "If you need to. He wasn't cruel. Not at first. He was careful, respectful, even—" He learned some of our words, brought gifts for Thomas. She stared out the window. "I think he actually convinced himself it was real, that we were a family." "Were you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Her look was sharp. "We survived. We adapted. When men have power over you, you learn to make them think they've won." Her hand went to her belly. "But at night, when he slept, I would lie awake and remember, not just you, us, who we were together. And now we see who we can be." She turned to leave, then paused. "The child. I told Luther the truth. It is yours. The timing, the signs. I'm certain." Gideon's knees nearly buckled. "Why tell him it might not be?" "Because doubt is a weapon. Because he needed to feel what we felt. Uncertainty, betrayal, loss." Her smile was fierce. "Because some justice happens in courtrooms, and some happens in the heart." The courthouse was packed. News of the case had spread, drawing curiosity seekers, Luther's supporters, and those who'd always resented his growing power. Gideon sat with Morrison at the plaintiff's table, trying not to search the crowd for familiar faces. Luther entered in chains, though his lawyers had fought against it. He'd lost weight in jail, his fine clothes replaced by rough prisoner's garb. When their eyes met, Gideon expected hatred. Instead, he saw something worse, emptiness, as if something vital had been extinguished. Judge Cartwright gavelled the proceedings to order. What followed was a methodical destruction of Luther's defenses. Morrison presented each piece of evidence with surgical precision: the forged documents, the timeline discrepancies, the witness testimonies. Luther's lawyers fought hard, but they were building on sand. When Charlie's affidavit was read, detailing the bribery, the forged letter, the careful planning, a murmur ran through the crowd. "Does the defendant wish to make a statement?" Judge Cartwright asked. Luther stood slowly. For a moment, the old arrogance flickered in his eyes. Then it died. "I did what I had to do," he said simply. "My brother abandoned his responsibilities. Someone had to step in." "By lying? By fraud?" the judge asked. "By surviving? By taking what was offered?" Luther looked at Gideon then. "You want to know the truth. Brother, I didn't plan it. Not at first. When the news came that you died, I grieved. For about a day. Then I looked around and saw opportunity. So you took it." "I took it. Just like you took those Apache women when decent white women would have had you. Just like you took land that could have been better used. We're not so different. You and I, we take what we want." "The difference," Gideon said quietly, "is that I didn't take from family." Luther laughed, bitter and broken. "Family? You left us. Gideon, you left me with father's debts, mother's grave to tend, everything. You went off to play soldier and noble savage, and I was left with nothing. So you took mine. I took what you threw away." Luther's voice rose. "And I made it better. I made it profitable. I made it respectable. You made it a prison." The words hung in the air. Luther sank back into his chair, the fight leaving him. His lawyers whispered urgently, but he waved them off. Judge Cartwright's ruling was swift and decisive. The land transfers were voided. Luther's claim to the property was nullified. Criminal charges would proceed: fraud, false imprisonment, conspiracy. The ranch and all improvements would revert to Gideon. Furthermore, the judge continued, given the unusual circumstances of Mr. Hartwell's domestic arrangements, this court recognizes his guardianship of the minor child Thomas and any children born of his unions, regardless of the legal status of said unions. It wasn't a recognition of marriage. That was too much to hope for. But it was protection, legal acknowledgement, more than Gideon had dared expect. As they filed out, Luther called out, "Gideon." Gideon paused, turned. His brother looked smaller somehow, diminished by more than the chains. "Take care of them," Luther said. "Better than I did. Better than—" He trailed off, then straightened. "I'll hang for this, or rot in prison. Either way, you've won." This wasn't about winning. "Luther." "No? Then what?" Gideon thought about it. "Coming home." Outside, a small crowd had gathered, some hostile, muttering about Apache lovers and Union sympathizers. But others nodded respectfully, touched their hats. The war was over, had been for years, but its divisions still ran deep. Atza and Nayland waited by Morrison's wagon, Thomas between them. As Gideon approached, he saw Joseph and several Apache men standing guard. The message was clear. These women were protected, had always been protected, by more than white men's laws. "It's over," Morrison said, grinning broadly. "We won everything, the ranch, the recognition, everything." But Gideon was watching Atza, who suddenly gripped Nolan's arm, her face contorting. "Not everything," she gasped. "The baby, it's coming." The ride to the doctor's house was a blur. Gideon held the reins while Nolan supported Atza in the wagon bed, Thomas wide-eyed and silent beside them. The doctor, a young man from Baltimore who treated Apache and white alike, took charge immediately. "Out," he ordered the men. "This is women's work now." So Gideon found himself pacing the doctor's porch, Joseph beside him, while inside Atza labored to bring new life into the world. The sun tracked across the sky, marking time in shadows and shifting light. "She's strong," Joseph said eventually. "Stronger than you know." "I know." "Do you?" Joseph studied him. 2 years she lived as another man's woman. bore it with dignity, never complained, never broke. That takes a different kind of strength than war. I know, Gideon repeated, and meant it. Thomas had fallen asleep on a bench, exhausted by the day's excitement. Gideon covered him with his coat, marveling at how peaceful the boy looked. His son, in every way that mattered. Near sunset. A cry pierced the air, high, indignant, alive. Gideon's heart stopped, then thundered back to life. The door opened, and Naylin appeared, tears streaming down her face, but smiling. "A girl," she said. "Perfect, beautiful. Come." Atsa lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in the softest blanket, was the tiniest human Gideon had ever seen. Dark hair, darker eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Your daughter," Atsa said simply, offering the bundle. Gideon took her with shaking hands. His daughter. The weight of her, so light, yet containing whole worlds. She yawned, a perfect tiny yawn, and his vision blurred. "What will you name her?" Naylin asked. Gideon looked at Atsa, who nodded. They'd discussed this. Apparently, made decisions while he was locked out. "Sarah," Atsa said, "for your mother, but also Ayana, eternal bloom, in my language. Sarah Ayana Hartwell." Gideon tested the name, found it good. "Hello, little one. I'm your father. I've been away, but I'm home now. I'm home." Later, as night settled over prosperity, they gathered in the doctor's parlor, a strange family by any measure. Gideon held his daughter while Thomas leaned against him, fascinated by his new sister. Naylin and Atsa sat close, the bonds between them stronger than any man could break. "Tomorrow we go home," Gideon said. "All of us." "It needs work," Naylin warned. "Luther changed things, not all for the better. Then we'll change them back, or make them new, together." Atsa reached over, touched his face, the first voluntary touch since his return. "Together," she agreed. "But understand, Gideon Hartwell, we are not the women you left. We've learned to stand alone. We'll stand with you now, but never again behind you. I wouldn't want it any other way." "Good, because tomorrow, after we go home, we talk, really talk, about the hurt, the anger, the fear, about the nights we thought you were dead and the days we wished you were, about everything. I can face that. Can you?" But she was almost smiling. "We'll see." Morrison appeared in the doorway. "I hate to interrupt, but there's news. Luther's been transferred to Yuma prison to await trial. He'll likely get 10 years hard labor." Gideon felt nothing, no satisfaction, no sorrow. Luther had made his choices. Now he'd live with them, as they all did. "Also," Morrison continued, "the Apache leaders want to meet with you tomorrow. Something about recognizing the marriages properly, making sure the children are protected by tribal law as well as territorial." "Of course," Gideon said, though he wondered what the Apache truly thought of him now, the white man who'd left their women vulnerable, then returned to reclaim them. Sarah fussed in his arms, and Atsa took her to nurse. Watching them, his fierce Apache wife and their daughter, Gideon felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, exactly. That would take time. But possibility. Hope. "Tell me about the war," Thomas said suddenly. "Were you brave?" Sometimes I was scared." "But you came back." "Yes, I came back." "Good," the boy said decisively. "Don't go away again." "I won't." Gideon promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Outside, a coyote howled, lonely sound made less so by the warm light spilling from windows. The murmur of voices planning tomorrow, the soft breathing of a newborn girl named for 2 cultures. The dead man was gone. In his place stood Gideon Hartwell, father, partner, survivor, a man with more scars than he'd left with, but also more reasons to heal. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The ranch needed work. Trust needed rebuilding. A life interrupted needed careful mending. But tonight, surrounded by the complex, imperfect, irreplaceable family he'd fought to return to, Gideon allowed himself to believe in resurrection. Not just his own, but all of theirs. rising from the ashes of what they'd been to become something new, something stronger, something worth coming home to. I'll write part 7 following the outline, focusing on the confrontation between Gideon and Luther at the ranch, with appropriate modifications for sensitivity, while maintaining the story's dramatic impact. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Gideon rode in alone. He'd left Atsa and Nayland in town with the children, despite their protests. This confrontation with Luther needed to happen, but he wouldn't risk them being caught in potential violence. Luther sat on the porch, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow, watching Gideon approach with hooded eyes. The past weeks since the trial had not been kind to him. Released on bond while appeals were filed, he'd been staying at the ranch under a court order not to leave the territory. His fine clothes hung loose on his frame, and stubble darkened his jaw. "Come to gloat?" Luther asked as Gideon dismounted. "Come to settle this, one way or another." "Settle," Luther laughed bitterly. "What's left to settle? You took everything, the ranch, the women, even my shame made public for all to see." Gideon climbed the porch steps slowly, his hand consciously away from his gun. "You took it first." "I took what you abandoned." Luther surged to his feet, swaying slightly. 3 years. Gideon, 3 years you were gone. Do you know what those years were like?" "Tell me." Luther's laugh was harsh. "Why? So you can judge me more? Fine. You want the truth?" He took a long pull from the bottle. "Father died 6 months after you left, drank himself to death, cursing your name. Mother followed a year later. Grief, the doctor said, but I know better. Shame killed her. Shame that her eldest son had taken up with savages." The word hung between them like a blade. Gideon's fists clenched, but he held still. "I buried them alone," Luther continued. "Paid the debts you didn't know about. Kept the creditors from taking the family land back in Missouri. And where were you? Playing war hero. I wrote, sent money when I could. Letters don't run a farm. Confederate dollars weren't worth spit by the second year." Luther slumped back in his chair. "I held it all together, waiting for you to come back. Then the death notice came. So you came here. Where else could I go? The farm was gone, sold to pay the last debts. I had nothing left but the brother who'd abandoned us all." His eyes glittered with old rage. "I found your ranch, your women living like they were real wives. The town ready to drive them off, or worse. So yes, I took over. I saved them. You lied to them. I gave them what they needed, protection, respectability, a white man's name to shield them. You think they survived 2 years because of love for your memory?" Luther spat. "They survived because I made them respectable. Mrs. Luther Hartwell could shop in town. The savage woman living in sin couldn't." The truth of it stung, but Gideon had already faced these facts. Maybe you started with good intentions, but somewhere you crossed a line. The line was crossed the day you chose them over your own blood. Luther stood again, steadier now, fueled by years of resentment. "Everything I did for family. Can you say the same? My wives are my family." "Your wives?" Luther moved closer, close enough that Gideon could smell the whiskey sweat. "You know what makes me sick? Not that you bedded Apache women. Plenty of men do that. It's that you elevated them, treated them like equals, made children with them you'd claim as yours. Because they are equals. Because the children are mine. That's where you're wrong. Brother, always were too soft-headed to see truth. They're survivors. I'll give them that. Atsa especially, strong as any man. But equals?" He shook his head. "They used you just like they used me. For protection, provision, position. The only difference is you were fool enough to call it love." Gideon hit him. Not a planned blow, but an explosion of all the anger he'd been containing. Luther crashed into the porch railing, blood spraying from his nose. "There he is," Luther wheezed, grinning through bloody teeth. The real Gideon, not the noble soldier or the enlightened Indian lover. Just a man who takes what he wants and justifies it later. They fought with the fury of years unleashed. Brothers who'd shared a cradle now trying to destroy each other. Luther was bigger, but soft from easy living. Gideon was leaner, Hardened by war and survival, they crashed through the porch furniture, Luther's whiskey bottle shattering against a post. Luther got his hands around Gideon's throat, pressing with desperate strength. "Should have stayed dead," he gasped. "Should have stayed a hero in their memories instead of coming back to show them what you really are." Gideon drove his knee up, breaking Luther's grip. They rolled apart, both breathing hard. Blood ran from cuts on both their faces. In the dust between them lay a broken picture frame, one of Luther's additions to the house, showing him posed stiffly with Atza and Nalen like a frontier patriarch. "Look at us," Gideon panted, "fighting over them like they're property to be won." "Aren't they?" Luther struggled to his feet. "That's what the law says, what the world says. Only difference between us is I'm honest about it." "No, the difference is I know I'm wrong." Gideon stood slowly, ribs aching. "I left them vulnerable, failed them, but I'm trying to do better. You're just trying to own them. Better to be owned than outcast." Luther wiped blood from his mouth. "You think taking them back to your bed makes you their savior? You've doomed them. That baby girl will grow up neither white nor Apache, belonging nowhere. Thomas will be the half-breed boy, tolerated but never accepted. And when the good citizens of prosperity decide they've had enough of the Apache lovers in their midst, who'll protect them?" "I will. Like you did before." Luther laughed, but it turned into a cough. "Face it, brother, I gave them safety. You're giving them a target on their backs." A horse approached, and both men tensed. But it was Morrison, driving his buggy at a reckless pace. "Gideon, thank God. You need to come back to town. Now!" "What's wrong?" "It's the Apache camp. Some cowboys got liquored up, talking about teaching the Indians a lesson. About your women specifically. Joseph and his men are ready to fight back. It's about to explode." Gideon was already moving toward his horse. Luther called after him. "You see? It's starting already. The price of your principles." "Then I'll pay it." "We'll all pay it," Luther shouted. "That's what you never understood. Your choices affect everyone around you. Your noble stands get other people killed." Gideon wheeled his horse around. "You coming, or are you going to sit here feeling sorry for yourself while people are in danger?" Luther stared at him. Then, slowly, he walked to the barn. When he emerged, he was buckling on a gun belt. "Not for you," he said. "For them. They deserve better than both of us. They rode hard for town. Brothers united by crisis, if nothing else." The streets of prosperity were too quiet. Townsfolk peering from behind curtains, outside the saloon. A crowd had gathered. Cowboys. Drifters. The kind of men who looked for any excuse to violence. "There they are," someone shouted. "The Indian lovers." Joseph and 5 Apache warriors faced the mob from across the street, rifles ready. Between them, like a spark waiting to ignite powder, stood Wade Beckett, Luther's former gun hand, arm still in a sling from his fight with Gideon, ugly drunk and uglier with hate. "Should have finished the job when I had the chance." Beckett slurred, eyes on Gideon. "You and your squaws and your half-breed whelps. This town don't need your kind." "Wade." Luther stepped forward, and the crowd stirred in surprise. "Stand down. You work for me." "Not anymore. Not since you let him take everything. Your own brother." Beckett spat. "You're as bad as him. Probably been sharing those Apache women all along." Luther's face went still. "Say that again." "You heard me. The whole Hartwell family. Nothing but Indian." Luther's gun cleared leather faster than Gideon had ever seen him move. The shot was impossibly loud in the tense street. Beckett looked down at the spreading red on his shirt, then toppled backward. For a heartbeat. Nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Cowboys went for guns. Apache rifles swung up. And in that fragment of time before wholesale slaughter, Luther threw himself between the two groups. "Stop!" he roared with all the authority he'd built over 2 years. "Everybody stop, or by God, I'll shoot the next man who moves." Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the sight of Luther Hartwell, the man who'd courted their favor, paid their wages, bought their drinks, standing with blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. But they stopped. "This is over," Luther continued, gun still out, covering the crowd. "Beckett's dead. Anyone else wants to join him, step forward." Nobody moved. "That's what I thought. You all go home, now, and if any of you even look crosswise at an Apache woman or child, you'll answer to me." The crowd dispersed slowly, muttering but cowed. The Apache warriors lowered their rifles but didn't relax. Joseph looked between the brothers, expression unreadable. "Why?" Gideon asked quietly. Luther holstered his gun with shaking hands. "Because some lines you don't cross. Because they're under my protection until a court says otherwise." He looked at Gideon. "Because maybe you were right about one thing. They deserve better than both of us." Sheriff Coleman arrived, looked at Beckett's body, then at the Hartwell brothers standing together. Self-defense. He drew first. Luther lied smoothly. "Plenty of witnesses." Coleman nodded slowly. He'd been in Luther's pocket once, but the wind had shifted. "Get him off the street. And Luther, your bond terms say no violence. This'll have to go to the judge." "I know." As the sheriff left, Luther turned to Gideon. "I just killed my own man. For them. For you." His voice was wondering, as if he didn't quite believe it himself. Father would be spinning in his grave. Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what Father would think. Luther laughed, short and bitter. "Too late for that. Too late for a lot of things." He started walking away, then paused. "Take care of them. Gideon. Better than I did. Better than you did before. They've earned that much. Luther, I'm going back to the ranch. Pack my things. I'll be gone before you bring them home." He looked back once. "Tell Atsa. Tell her the baby will be beautiful. Apache or white or both. Beautiful." Gideon watched his brother walk away, shoulders bent like a man carrying stones. Around them, prosperity slowly returned to its business, pretending nothing had happened. But something had. A line had been drawn, sides chosen, and for once, maybe for the first time, the Hartwell brothers had stood on the same side. "Your brother," Joseph said, moving up beside Gideon. "He surprises. He always has. Will he keep his word? Leave peacefully?" Gideon thought about Luther's face when he'd shot Beckett, the shock of finding himself capable of killing for something besides profit or pride. "Yes, I think he will." "Good. The women and children are safe at the mission. Atsa says to tell you she's proud but also furious. She says you promised not to fight Luther." "I promised not to kill him. There's a difference." Joseph smiled slightly. "She said you'd say that. She also said to bring food when you come. Nalen's teaching the mission wives to make fry bread." The normality of it, domestic concerns in the aftermath of near massacre, made Gideon's throat tight. This was what he'd fought to return to. Not just land or even love, but the right to worry about ordinary things. Dinner and children's games, and whether the roof would hold through winter. He found them at the Presbyterian mission. Of all places, Reverend Morse's wife had defied her husband and half the congregation to offer shelter. Atsa sat with Sarah, the baby peaceful despite the chaos. Nalen was indeed teaching bread-making. Thomas helping by getting flour everywhere. "You're hurt," Atsa said, taking in his battered face. "Luther and I had words, and fists. Men." But she reached up to touch a cut on his cheek. "Is it finished? He's leaving, tonight, for good, I think. And the town, that's less finished. But Luther stood with us. Killed his own man to stop violence." Gideon sat beside her, suddenly exhausted. "Things won't be easy." "Were they ever?" Atsa shifted Sarah to one arm, leaned against him. "We're Apache women who chose a white man. You're a white man who chose Apache women. Easy was never possible. Do you regret it?" She was quiet long enough that he feared the answer. Then, "I regret the pain, the fear, the nights of not knowing. But us, no. Even when I hated you for leaving, for dying, for not dying, I never regretted us." "I love you," he said simply. "I know, it's not enough, but it's a start." Morrison appeared in the doorway. "Gideon, Luther's at the jail. He wants to see you before they transport him to Yuma tomorrow. They're taking him despite judge's orders. The shooting today violated his bond, justified or not." Morrison hesitated. "He says it's important." Gideon looked at Atsa, who nodded. "Go, make your peace if you can." The jail was small. Just 2 cells. Luther sat on a narrow bunk, looking older than his years. When he saw Gideon, he almost smiled. "Come to see the fallen brother. Come to say thank you for today." "Don't thank me. I didn't do it for you." Luther was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about Father, about the choices we made. You know what's funny? He hated that you took up with Apache women, but he'd have hated more that I stole from family. He was a hard man to please. Impossible man to please. Maybe that's why we both ran so far in opposite directions." Luther pulled out an envelope. "This is for you, or them, rather. Deed transfer, making everything legal and clear. No more appeals. No more fights." Gideon took the envelope. Surprised. "Why?" "Because I'm tired. Because 10 years in Yuma sounds like rest compared to carrying all this hate." Luther met his eyes. "Because maybe it's time one of us tried to be better than Father taught us to be. It's not too late. Luther, when you get out, when I get out, I'll be someone else. Somewhere else." Luther lay back on the bunk. "Go home, brother. Go home to your family and leave me to make peace with my choices." Gideon stood to leave, then paused. "They would have forgiven you, Atsa and Nalin, if you'd been honest from the start. They would have helped you. We all would have. Maybe, but we'll never know now." Luther closed his eyes. "Goodbye, Gideon. Try not to get yourself killed. Those women deserve some peace." Outside the jail, night was falling over Prosperity. Gideon stood for a moment, breathing in the desert air, feeling the weight of endings and beginnings. Tomorrow, Luther would be gone. The ranch would be theirs again. Life would move forward. He walked back toward the mission, where lights glowed warm in windows and voices carried on the evening breeze. His family, strange and complicated and perfect, waited there. The road ahead would be hard. The town would test them. Their children would face challenges he could only partly shield them from. But tonight, they were together. Tonight, they were alive. And sometimes, Gideon was learning. That was victory enough. As he reached the mission door, he heard Thomas's laugh, Nayland's singing, Sarah's tiny cry, and for the first time since riding home from war, Gideon Hartwell felt the tight band around his chest finally, truly ease. He was home. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson as they returned to the ranch. 3 wagons made the journey, one carrying their few possessions, another loaded with supplies Morrison had helped them purchase, and the third holding the most precious cargo, Gideon's family. Thomas rode up front with Gideon, chattering excitedly about being home. The boy had adapted with the resilience of childhood, already calling Gideon Papa without prompting. Behind them, Atsa held Sarah while Nayland drove the supply wagon with surprising skill. "Look," Thomas pointed ahead. Our house. Our house." The simple words carried such weight. Gideon's throat tightened as the ranch came into view. Luther's fancy additions looked out of place against the original structure, like store-bought clothes on a working man. But underneath, the bones of what he'd built remained. They pulled up in the yard, and for a moment, nobody moved. The magnitude of what lay ahead, rebuilding not just a ranch but a life, seemed to settle over them like dust. "Well," Atsa said finally, "standing here won't get the work done." They unloaded in companionable efficiency. Joseph and 2 other Apache men had ridden out earlier to check the property. They reported that Luther had kept his word. His personal effects were gone. The house left clean and intact. "He left this," Joseph said, handing Gideon an envelope. Inside was a photograph, the one from the broken frame, showing Luther with Atsa and Nayland. But Luther had cut himself out of it, leaving only the women, on the back, in Luther's careful script. "They were never mine. L. That first night they gathered in the main room after Thomas had been put to bed, the fancy furniture felt wrong, too formal for who they were. Gideon sat on the floor, Apache style, and after a moment, Nayland joined him. Atsa, still recovering from childbirth, took the one chair she admitted was comfortable. "We need to talk," Atsa said. "Really talk, about everything." And so they did. Words poured out like water from a broken dam. Nayland spoke of the nights she'd stood at the window, watching for a rider who never came, of teaching Thomas to say prayers for a father he'd been told was dead, of the day Luther first kissed her and how she'd cried afterward, feeling like a betrayer and betrayed all at once. Atsa's words came harder, each one sharp-edged with old pain. She told of the townsmen who'd come that first week after the death notice, making offers that weren't offers but threats, of Luther's arrival like a wall between them and destruction, of the slow erosion of hope as months became years. "I fought him," she said, eyes on the fire. "Not physically. That would have meant our destruction. But in my heart, I fought. Every smile was strategy. Every soft word was survival." Her voice dropped. "Until I couldn't tell any more where strategy ended and surrender began." Gideon listened to it all, forcing himself not to look away from their pain. When they finished, the room felt hollowed out, empty of secrets but full of ghosts. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "It's not enough, but I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't change the past," Atsa said, "but it might help build a future." Days fell into a rhythm of work and careful healing. Gideon and Joseph began tearing down Luther's unnecessary fences, opening the land back up. The cattle Luther had bought, good stock, Gideon had to admit, were moved to better grazing. The house slowly transformed, made theirs again. Thomas proved invaluable, his child's memory providing unexpected bridges. "Uncle Luther said you were the best horseman in the territory," he told Gideon one day. Or, "Mama used to cry when she made your favorite stew." Nayland returned to her garden, coaxing life from soil that had been neglected. She sang while she worked, old Apache songs mixed with hymns she'd learned at the mission. Sometimes Gideon caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't read, part memory, part question, part something that might have been hope. Atsa was more complicated. She moved through the days like a warrior in enemy territory, always alert, always careful. She nursed Sarah with fierce devotion but held herself apart from Gideon, allowing only the most necessary interactions. 2 weeks into their return, Morrison rode out with news. "Luther's been sentenced, 10 years hard labor, like we expected. But there's something else." He pulled out a letter. "This came to my office, from California." The letter was from a law firm in San Francisco. Luther had liquidated hidden assets, money he'd saved over the years, and placed them in trust for Thomas and Sarah, enough to ensure their education, their future. "Blood money," Atsa said flatly. "Maybe," Gideon agreed. "But it's also a chance. Education for Thomas that doesn't depend on the charity of people who hate him. Security for Sarah. You'd take his money? After everything. I'd take the devil's money if it helped our children." That night, unable to sleep, Gideon walked out to the small cemetery he'd established years ago. Just a few graves of ranch hands who'd died over the years. There was a new stone now, one he hadn't placed. It read simply, "The past, buried but not forgotten. 1872. He found Atsa there, shadowed in moonlight." "Joseph's idea," she said. "He thought we needed a place to mourn what was lost. And do you? Mourn. Every day." She turned to face him. "I mourn the woman who believed her husband was invincible. I mourn the innocence that thought love was enough. I mourn 2 years of my life given to a lie." "I mourn too," Gideon said. "The man who left. The certainty I used to have. The brother I thought I knew." They stood in silence, separated by more than the space between them. Then Atsa spoke again, so quietly he almost missed it. "But I also celebrate." "What?" "I celebrate surviving. I celebrate that my daughter will know her real father. I celebrate that Nalin smiles again when she doesn't know anyone's watching. She moved closer. I celebrate that you came back, even if part of me hates you for it. Atsa, let me finish. She was close enough now that he could see the tears she'd been hiding. Luther gave me comfort, security, a kind of peace, but he never gave me fire. He never made me feel like I could conquer the world or die trying. He never made me feel alive. And I did. You do. The admission seemed to cost her. Even now, broken as we are, you make me feel alive. And I hate that I love that. I hate that I love... She broke off, turned away. Say it, Gideon urged gently. Please. I love you, she whispered. I never stopped. Even when I shared Luther's bed. Even when I carried what I thought was his child. Even when I prayed for the strength to forget, I loved you. Gideon reached for her slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he drew her against him, feeling the tension in her body, the war between desire and distrust. I don't know how to do this, she said against his chest. How to be yours again after being his, how to trust when trust nearly destroyed us. Then we learn, together, as slow as you need. She pulled back to look at him. There will be bad days. Days when the anger comes back, when the memories poison everything. Can you live with that? Can you? Instead of answering, she kissed him. It was nothing like their kisses before. Those had been confident. Sure, this was tentative, almost frightened, but real. When they parted, both were trembling. One day at a time, she said. That's all I can promise. That's enough. They walked back to the house together, not quite touching, but closer than they'd been since his return. In the kitchen, they found Nalin awake, feeding Sarah a bottle of goat's milk. The baby was thriving, but hungry always. Couldn't sleep either, Nalin asked. Too much to think about, Atsa replied. Taking the baby, Nalin studied them both, taking in their closeness. Atsa's tear-stained face. Gideon's careful hope. Good, she said simply. It's about time. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were real. Trust rebuilt itself in small moments. Gideon teaching Thomas to track rabbits. Atsa allowing him to hold Sarah while she slept. Nalin singing him awake with the same songs she'd used years before. The town kept its distance mostly, though there were exceptions. Misses. Morse from the mission visited weekly, bringing baby clothes and gossip. Sam the postmaster always had a kind word. Even Sheriff Coleman, freed from Luther's influence, proved surprisingly fair-minded. But there were incidents too. Words carved into their fence posts. A dead coyote left at their gate. Once, riders in the night, firing shots into the air before Joseph and his men chased them off. We could leave, Gideon suggested after that night. California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere fresh. No. Atsa's voice was firm. This is our land. We bled for it, all of us. We don't run. The children will grow up strong because of the challenges, not despite them. She touched his face. Besides, where would we go that would be different? At least here. We know who our enemies are. Summer turned to fall, the desert cooling into something almost gentle. Thomas started lessons with Morrison, who'd taken an interest in the boy's education. Sarah grew round and happy, with her mother's fierce eyes and her father's stubborn chin. And slowly, carefully, they became a family again. Not the family they'd been. That was gone forever. But something new, forged in pain but tempered by truth. One evening, as purple dusk settled over the desert, they sat on the porch Luther had built, watching Thomas chase fireflies. Sarah slept in Gideon's arms while Nalin mended clothes and Atsa cleaned her rifle, old habits dying hard. I've been thinking, Nalin said suddenly, about names. Names? For the next one. She placed a hand on her stomach, smiling shyly. Spring, I think. Gideon's heart stopped, then raced. Yes. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He looked at Atsa. Both of you. Did you know? Suspected. Atsa admitted. Hoped. Another child. Gideon marveled. Another chance to get things right, or mess them up differently, Atsa said. But she was smiling. Thomas ran up, hands cupped around a firefly. "Look, I caught one." Gently, Nayland reminded him. "It's fragile. I know." The boy opened his hands, and the insect flew free, blinking its small light into the gathering dark. "Papa says the best things come back if you let them go." Gideon's throat tightened. He didn't remember saying that. But maybe he had, or maybe Thomas had learned it on his own. This child who'd lost one father and gained another, who lived between two worlds with the grace they were all still learning. "That's right," he managed. "The best things always come back." As full dark settled over the ranch, they moved inside, his Apache wives, his children, his reclaimed life. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds would always ache when the weather changed. Some words once said couldn't be taken back. Some trust, once broken, would always bear the seam of its repair. But it was theirs, hard-won and honest, complicated and real. A life built not on the lie of perfection, but on the truth of forgiveness, the daily choice to try again. Gideon Hartwell had gone to war and come back to find his life stolen. But in fighting to reclaim it, he'd discovered something worth more than what he'd lost. The knowledge that love wasn't about possession or even about deserving. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing to build something from the ruins. The house settled into sleep around him, and Gideon allowed himself one moment of perfect contentment. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The town would test them. The children would face hardships he couldn't prevent. But tonight, in this house built by many hands, filled with the breathing of those he loved, Gideon Hartwell was exactly where he belonged. The war was over. He was home. And this time, he was staying. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in the darkness, another answered. The sound that had once seemed lonely now spoke of connection, of voices finding each other across the vast space of the desert night, just like they had, just like they would continue to do, one day at a time, for all the days to come. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed following Gideon's journey home and his family's path to healing. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share what touched you most about this tale of love, betrayal, and redemption in the Arizona Territory. Your comments and stories help build our community of Western history enthusiasts.